October should be when we're really seeing those big rate drops, because peak season will have been long over because it happened early this year. Some really big spot rate drops. Long-term rates not so much because they're just not moving as much at the moment, so there's less for them to fall, but there is still ground there, and I think that should come, because if you think about October, that's when a lot of European shippers start thinking about their annual tender again, and thinking where that should go. So I think there we should see significant downward pressure. Welcome to the Freight Debate, the ultimate destination for supply chain professionals, logistics leaders, and anyone who's ever wondered what really keeps the world moving. And speaking of keeping the world moving, Phil, you're in Munich this week for Transport Logistics, a huge gathering with lots of people. Any insights from there?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really interesting couple of days. We have published our mid-year outlook, the Xeneta 2025 mid-year outlook. So we're taking the opportunity to share that with customers and wider industry stakeholders. And Peter Sand, our chief analyst, gave a presentation on the Port of Rotterdam stage today as well, which was great to see. So really interesting, lots of topics, as you can imagine, to be discussed, and some of them we'll be discussing in the podcast today.
Always lots going on at the Port of Rotterdam. I guess they were the ones thinking an awful lot about a return to the Red Sea and potential problems from there. And we'll get on to that today. But so I think we have two main topics to cover today, and the first is this legal action in the courts over in the US, kind of throwing the tariffs into even more uncertainty. And then, as you mentioned, we've done our mid-year outlook, and we've done a couple of podcasts now, kind of reacting to all the stuff going on in the world. But we haven't really set the scene for actually where is container shipping, where is this, how many ships are there, what is demand doing, and so we're going to pick up on some of those points that we covered in our mid-year outlook, like you said, and just kind of set the base understanding for where shipping is at the moment.
Let's do it.
Perfect. So do you want to start off with the legal woes over in the US?
Thanks for that, Emily. Yeah, I can. Give me the hardest part of the whole thing. I mean, is it possible to? This is the thing. I mean, we had the court ruling last week that essentially deemed the sweeping tariffs, we got to be clear here, not all of the tariffs, but the kind of this more sweeping natured tariffs as being unlawful. The immediate aftermath was this means all the tariffs are no longer in place. Then we had appeals going in, God knows what else going in, and now it seems that the tariffs will remain in place until appeals are heard, but who knows how long appeals are going to take when it gets into the machinery of legal systems. So shippers, we thought it was impossible to get further uncertainty, didn't we? But somehow we got more uncertainty. So that's where we are. We could try and spend half an hour trying to decipher all the legal ramifications, but there's probably people that are more legally adequate to do that than us. So, as you say, I think we best look at the whole world, because there's more to the world than just tariffs, isn't there? And see what 2025 has got in store.
I'd love to catch that setup, but I think I just want to mention one point on this side of things, on the tariffs, and that is that this is the tariffs that have kind of come straight from the Oval Office without any real process. So these tariffs, if they are deemed illegal, and in a best case scenario, shippers would get those tariffs reimbursed, but there are other tools that can be pulled on. Whether that's Section 232, which is kind of this referral to something that threatens national security, and that's, for example, where the steel and aluminium tariffs come under. And that was then in the sort of a day after the announcement, he suddenly decided to increase tariffs there to 50% from 25%, and he's still in his right to do so. And that's also where we kind of been looking at other goods for a while, pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. They've all fallen under that, and we're waiting to see what happens there. And you could add certainly a lot more goods there. I mean, even, was it movies he wanted to tariff, films he wanted to tariff, and somehow link that to national security? And then the other one is this 301 report that we were talking a lot about with the port fees, but that's also where the tariffs during his first administration came under. So there are other tools to pull on, even if the courts uphold that this is illegal and Congress doesn't decide to follow it. So we're definitely not out of the woods when it comes to tariffs.
He's not going to take it lying down, though, is he?
If you the next day double tariffs on steel and aluminium, that's not lying down. That's saying fine, but I can still do this.
Yeah. So whatever people's opinions are on Donald Trump, and he is clearly one of the most divisive figures in political history, probably. I think we can all be in agreement that he isn't just going to accept someone saying you can't do that. He is going to find other ways to achieve what it is that he wants to achieve. And as you say, there was the port fees working in parallel to the tariffs. We had de minimis kind of working in the same kind of sphere of as tariffs in air, mainly air freight side of things. But there are going to be other levers, aren't they? And they're going to get creative. There'll be things that maybe we haven't even thought about that I'm sure they will have done. So it's going to be a really interesting remainder of 2025, isn't it? Because
Absolutely.
yeah,
And
you
it
know,
sets up the next month as we get to that 9th of July deadline for tariffs on imports from everywhere but China. If you weren't
yeah,
lining up to queue for a trade deal beforehand, which didn't seem to be the case, why would
no,
you do it now when that position's changed and there's even more uncertainty? So that leaves open the door for shippers again to think, okay, will that 50% that's been talked about for imports from Europe, and what about all the other countries? What happens there? And this throws that even more up in the air. But I
yeah,
know you're keen to get onto the outlook and all the rest of it, so let's dig
let's
in
do it.
there.
Yes. So Xeneta publish a outlook every around October. It's around October to coincide with our annual summit. We did the same thing in October 2024 when we held our summit to hundreds of stakeholders over in Amsterdam last year. The problem with releasing a 2025 outlook in October 2024 is that the world changes on a daily basis. So what we decided to do is take a look at what we said in October 2024 and give people a mid-year outlook, looking back, but also looking forward to the rest of the rest of 2025 to see how it's going to shape up in terms of demand, supply, disruptions, and all the other things that we need to cover. Are you ready, Emily?
Well, I was going to say, of course, this year the reason we need a mid-year update is because of tariffs. We did the same thing in 2024, and that was because of the Red Sea. I'm crossing my fingers that 2026 we won't need a mid-year outlook, but I'm not sure I'd bet a lot of money on it at the moment.
No.
There will
Well, it's a
always be
lot
new
of
things coming.
it's a lot of work for a start for, isn't it?
A lot of work. So, but yeah, so I think maybe let's start with the supply side of things, and we can get to demand later because that's obviously the one heavily impacted by tariffs. And of course, when we talk supply and container shipping at the moment, what we're looking at is a lot of capacity. Carriers made a lot of money in 2020, 2021, 2022, and they ordered ships. And those ships started being delivered in late 2023, and we had record high deliveries in 2024 and still quite high deliveries now. So the fleet has grown massively since kind of the pandemic period, and the capacity is there. So when we wrote that outlook in October 2023, we were saying capacity is ample. There's so much of it, rates will fall. And that's what we saw in Q4 of that year. Rates fell, carriers started losing money. And what flipped that was the Red Sea suddenly absorbing a whole load of that capacity. And that's still the case, that we're still avoiding the Red Sea to a large effect. Most carriers are still choosing to sail around the Cape of Good Hope, and that means those ships are employed and there's something for them to do. Especially now when there's also this kind of increase in demand going to the US trying to beat tariffs. So for the moment, the ships are still relatively fully employed, and that's also why carriers can get those rates up. But there comes a side of things, either when we see a sort of drop in front loading once the tariffs are back in place, or the 90-day pause ends and wherever tariffs then land, we'll see lower demand. And even without a return to the Red Sea, there are enough ships there to deal with it, and that's why we then expect a considerable drop in freight rates, because there are just so many new ships out there, and demand growth hasn't matched that to any sort of reasonable or match that growth. So to us, that's why without the Red Sea, without tariffs, ship carriers should be losing a lot of money, and that's not happening at the moment.
Yeah. There was an echo, wasn't there, between October 2023 and October 2024, where 2023 we were saying overcapacity, overcapacity, overcapacity. Then October last year, albeit the Red Sea diversions were still happening, but there was going to be overcapacity return, wasn't it? Just because services have kind of stabilized, maybe, and those schedules were baked in. But who knows what's going to happen? Because just because you're here now, if you're a shipper, you'd be looking back to what you did in October 2023, securing lower rates. I think, oh God, do we do the same thing again? Because
those stupid people over at Xeneta kept talking about overcapacity, and it kept getting thrown away because something else happened. Which is a fair point. But I still believe that is there. The ships, there are so many ships that have been delivered. I think I don't have the numbers in front of me, but since 2019, the fleet has grown by 40%, and we're looking at demand growth between 10 and 12%, if I remember correctly. That's a huge gap between the two. Helped now up by Red Sea and obviously front loading, but at some point that has to come back to bite.
Yeah, but and presumably towards the end of the year, demolition is going to be ramped up.
Logically, yes. Logically, carriers, there's an awful lot of old ships that haven't been demolished because they've been managing to earn profitable charter rates. And at some stage that has to flip. Now, there's always a delay between freight rates coming down and charter rates going down and demolition increasing. But until whichever you want to use, we get another Black Swan event, that should be the natural sort of course that we would expect to see for the rest of 2025 and into 2026, because this is a huge backlog of ships that has to be worked through as well.
Yeah. So what about Red Sea? I mean, that's another topic covered in the Xeneta Outlook report. Should we cover that next in terms of its potential ramifications? Again, I mean, it's hard for us because no one really knows when there's going to be a large-scale return to the Red Sea, do they? But maybe it feels more possible than previously. That's as certain as you can be, isn't it?
Yes. I'm not sure I quite agree on that. I think obviously everybody's still talking about it. But if you think about what needs to happen for that return, I don't think we're much closer to it than we have been for the past 6 months, say. And I might be completely off, and it's absolutely possible I'm often wrong. But I'm not sure I'm as optimistic as you are about it. So maybe you take the lead on this one.
I mean, we had the ceasefire between Houthi and the US, didn't we, last month? I think it was. But we also, I mean, okay, my glass is going to be half empty now. You convinced me. No, we had the. It wasn't a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, but there was an announcement of a phased pathway towards a ceasefire back in February, and that had no impact whatsoever, did it? I suppose the reason that my glass is half full-ish is that at some point this has to be resolved, doesn't it?
I totally agree with you on that. But the some point to me is a little bit further in the future than you seem to indicate.
Yeah, but would the Suez Canal Authority was it them that was offering 15% discounts to transit the canal? If they thought there was no chance of carriers taking it up, they wouldn't offer the discount. Would they offer the discounts?
That's true. That's very true.
Is your glass half full? Have I convinced you?
I don't think a 15% discount from the Suez Canal is what will make carriers go back. No. I think there's a question of, because we talk about, okay, we're expecting falling rates to come sort of from August when those 90-day pauses come. And that is the case regardless of whether we get back to the Suez Canal or not. Of course, if you do go back to the Suez Canal, firstly, that then leads to a lot of disruption, a lot of congestion, as I presume the Port of Rotterdam discusses a lot in Munich. But even without that, rates could come down substantially. And then if that were to happen after that period of disruption, they would go even further down, would be my assumption. But they can come quite far down without a return because, again, the capacity is there and our demand is looking much less, is going to grow much less this year.
Yeah, okay. Moving on, just very quickly before moving on, actually. Again, it harps back to Q4 2023, doesn't it? And carriers go into that loss-making position. It's going to be really difficult for that to not happen, regardless of the situation in the Red Sea, isn't it? If demand falls, and if there's higher tariffs, then you've got the underlying consumer demand maybe doesn't drive container shipping volumes in the way it maybe did during COVID and that period. So troubled
And
water.
carriers won't say as much, but if you look at some of the Q1 results, the profits they reported in Q1 compared to the full year guidance they gave for the whole year, that was often between 0 and whatever number, where their already acquired profits were somewhere between those two numbers. So even for them, they see a potential that certainly towards the latter part of the year, their profits will fall. They will start losing money, and that would mean that you get into that range. So that's also something they're indicating.
Well, all the major carriers are in Munich here with me, so I can go and ask them and say, are you going to return to a loss-making position once we get to Q4 and demand drops? I'll report
I'm
back
sure you'll
what they say.
get very, very honest and reliable answers.
Yeah. Talking of reliability, that's a lovely segue. Well done. Alliances. How are we seeing this? Because back in October, again, when we first published our 2025 outlook, we were looking forward to February and the new alliance structures. We're now 4 months on from the start of February, so they've had a little bit of time to get their schedules and services up and running. As we just discussed, huge overcapacity, threats of port fees and all that kind of stuff, threats of falling rates. So how do you view the alliance or the new alliance landscape in 2025?
I think when it comes to reliability, it seems to be going quite well, and in particular for Gemini, right, with their sort of stated goal of 90% that for the first few months they've got there. The coming few weeks look like they could be a tricky period when it comes to reliability, as we talk more and more about congestion, be that in the Far East with Shanghai, I think leading, Singapore also starting to report problems. We've had issues in North Europe with this record high capacity coming in the middle of all the holidays, some weather issues, and then obviously when we get to the US, if you start to see an uptick as that comes in, and that could really start to hurt you. But past that, and it's linked to demand. The more containers need to be moved, the more pressure there is on ports, and the more risk of congestion. I think a big difference to back during the pandemic, which is the comparison we're making a lot, is this demand uptick is much, much more limited. So you might have a problem for 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, up to 3 months, but no longer than that, because this demand that we're experiencing at the moment, this high demand, has a flip side, and that would ease it. But definitely kind of the carriers being put under more pressure again to move these volumes ahead of time, out of skies at their normal schedules, plus Red Sea and all the other problems. So that will be interesting to watch.
Yeah, we're not here to cheerlead any carriers in particular, and we're entirely neutral. But would it be fair to say that the way that the market and the demand kind of dynamics have developed in 2025, does it kind of suit Gemini? In terms of them being able to swap ships around and rather than blanking sailings, because as you said, they have reached a high level of reliability, haven't they?
They have. Whether their model then is better suited than the other alliances with more direct port calls, I think the reality is we haven't really seen the full effects of it. So we saw this different approach to blanking sailings where they didn't really blank anything but put in smaller ships. But the period in which demand was low, it was 2-3 weeks. So we didn't really see the full effects on that. We didn't see the effect on freight rates. Now obviously that's flipped and they're trying to do the reverse. But we still need to give them a few weeks to figure out, okay, if this model then does work for them. And of course, whether they can move more demand, whether they can get it quicker, whether they can get those shippers on board as well, because there is still competition for those containers. So I think we've kind of seen the first hints of what this strategy is, but we haven't really had a period where we've been able to sort of fully decide, okay, this works or this doesn't work. So that's also something to watch in the coming weeks, and which we will keep all our listeners updated on.
So in the Xeneta mid-year outlook, we give data on deliveries and expected scheduled deliveries. And there are some carriers with a lot of incoming TEU. If you're a shipper looking at those alliances and those carriers, I mean, MSC, big enough to be alliance, so we group them together. You should be factoring that into your strategy, should you not? Because if you don't, then you're kind of downplaying the power that you have in the negotiations, surely. Because they're under, these carriers are under pressure, and the pressure's going to build the more TEU comes into their fleet.
Absolutely. And they might not be under quite so much pressure for the next 2 months as we get these front loaded volumes. But as soon as we get to the backside of that, as soon as we get to late August, that situation changes. And even without new deliveries, they'll be under pressure. Add to that all the new ships that they're expecting that they can't push, and you really have a strong card when you go into negotiate, because they do want your volumes. And that's also why we're talking at the moment, and I think we've mentioned it, but spot rates are increasing rapidly into the US, but also into North Europe and Mediterranean and other trades. But the long-term rates aren't following that, because more or less everybody can see this is a short-term thing. I'm not signing up for a longer-term contract that is going to be pushed up by the current spot market development, because I can see an end to that. And I don't want to be paying those higher rates past the next 3-6 months, let alone for a 1-year contract.
Yeah, and again, referring back to the outlook, we include a chart in the outlook. I think it's the Trans-Pacific, from memory, that shows the development of the spot on long on that trade, and it's absolutely, even as a kind of non-shipping procurement kind of expert who doesn't do it on a day-to-day basis, I mean, you just need to look at that chart, don't you, and say, this is not the right time to be locking in for a 12-month contract. It's there in front of your face. So my question would be, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say that because in theory, we had the same period during the pandemic where spot rates were rising before long-term rates moved. And there, it might have been quite a good idea to pay an extra $500 on your long rate if that meant you could lock it in for 12 months. But that's only because spot rates continued to spiral and went to really high levels for a long, long time. And this is different as well. So yes, I agree with your point that it's obvious on a chart that you shouldn't be signing long-term rates when the spot market's high. But actually, back then, that would have made sense. But because the pressure is different this time and it's so much more time limited, it shouldn't. I was going to say it doesn't, but I'm going to sort of give myself a bit of room to say it shouldn't make sense.
Nothing makes sense, though, sometimes. we live in a world that doesn't make sense. That's the problem. But if you're a shipper, though, and you say, Jack, do you know what? I don't want to lock in for another 12-month contract, and you have a strategy of, I'm going to, well, if you play the spot market, I suppose you're going to be paying more at the moment, aren't you? So there's a downside to that. But let's say you want a 6-month contract. That carrier you're negotiating with doesn't want you to have a 6-month contract, do they? Clearly they want a longer contract as possible. So the very fact that a carrier would even entertain the suggestion of a 6-month contract when historically you've always had 12-month contracts, that says it. If you're a shipper, that's kind of the signal, isn't it? For I'm in business, I can dictate far more than I've dictated previously.
And in many ways, it reminds us of the situation in January, where the spot market was much higher than the long-term market, and a lot of people were going in to sign 1-year deals with this expectation that the market would fall. So we saw a long-term contract running for 3 months was getting a much higher price than a long-term contract running for 12 months, because carriers wanted to lock in those higher volumes. But in this case, right, you want to try and avoid getting too long, or risk playing the spot market at the moment and then push it further back when the spot market falls and get that, or do an index linking deal. That's always we always come back to that. And I think we can't miss that for some people on the long-term market at the moment, this is a very tricky situation, in part because of one of the reasons we say indexing is a benefit, and that is that the spread between spot and long-term rates is opening up, and that risks your cargo getting rolled. So maybe now is the time when, okay, I'm going to move a certain share of my volumes onto the spot market or say yes to this particular surcharge. But again, that's running from start June now until late July, early August, and then we should return to a situation with falling spot rates and coming down quite quickly.
Yeah, and I always try and make this point that we refer to the market, don't we? And we've done it probably 20 times already in this podcast. We say the market, and actually we also then say the average spot rate or the long-term rate, which is the average. But we're talking about thousands upon thousands of shippers, and probably every single one has unique volumes and trades and supply chain needs. Everyone, we talk about these disruptions, but every single business is going to experience them in slightly different ways, aren't they? We've in the recent weeks we've been at pains to describe the mid-high area of the market being more representative of the the rates being paid in the cargo rush following the lowering of the tariffs. So we've got to be clear, haven't we, that experiences are going to vary. If you're a large volume shipper, you've always kind of dictated terms, I presume, or dictated terms more than a low volume shipper, and that's still going to be the case, isn't it? But what we're talking about here is just the further market wins, maybe amplifying those existing historic dynamics.
And I was looking at this just earlier today, from looking at spot rates from China to the US West Coast. If you take the market average, between 1st of May and 1st of June, they're up by about 70% with the data we have in at the moment. If you look at the mid-low, which is if you're shipping on the 25th percentile, so the lower end of the market, that's up 30%. So yes, it's up, but nowhere near as much as the market average. And if you're on the mid-high, that's pushed to $6,000, and that's almost 140% up from 1st of May. So again, yes, they're all up, but there's a big difference between 30, 67, and 140%, and that's also key to remember.
Yeah, and then if we take this to, we kind of take it to the next phase of this market development, if demand does slow, as it probably will do as we head further into H2, and rates fall, then you're going to still need to be looking at the different areas of the market, aren't you? Because the falling market is, the mid-low. Would it be the case? I don't know. Would it be the mid-low that kind of leads the march of a downward market? So if you're a shipper, that's really what you use as the bellwether for looking at, this kind of, as we say, maybe a falling market the rest of 2025.
No, absolutely. That's what we usually see, in particular if you look at our spot rates. Typically, a lot of that is from freight forwarders, and the experience suggests that when the market is rising, we hear it from the small freight forwarders first, and they're the ones getting pushed on higher surcharges and higher rates. But when the market starts falling, they're also the ones that go first. Earlier this year, we were talking about promo rates, where it was being offered to certain freight forwarders for a certain share of their volumes, but that they're the ones who suddenly the carrier will be willing to take their phone and will offer them a much better rate, and they start that drop. So whether it also happens this time, I think when it's also a much more limited time period, we'll have to see. But that has been the trend over the past many years.
Yeah, and you don't see it in the average, do you?
Nope.
You don't see it, and I worked with the media a lot as part of my role, and we externally we're always quoting average spot rates, and other businesses are quoting average spot rates, but it isn't. It's fine for a bellwether, when you're being kind of when a journalist is wanting to show what general direction the market's moving. If you're actually procuring freight, and you talk what was the difference in the mid, the average and the mid high? If you're procuring freight, those dollars make a huge difference, don't they? Absolutely
Huge. Absolutely.
Okay, well, we've covered most of the Xeneta outlook. We haven't revealed all the secrets because we'd encourage listeners and viewers to download it for themselves, and you can do so on the Xeneta website. There's tons of really interesting insights. So all that's left really, Emily, is for me to ask you where are we going to be when I think it's a summit in Barcelona this year. I think it is. So we'll be in Barcelona, and we will release our 2026 summit, which seems really scary and crazy to say already. How are we viewing the rest of 2025? What do you think it will be? Come on, make some bold predictions. And I don't want your glass half empty, Red Sea continuing. Let's make some bold predictions of where we're going to be.
October should be when we're really seeing those big rate drops, because peak season will have been long over because it happened early this year. Some really big spot rate drops. Long-term rates not so much, because they're just not moving as much at the moment, so there's less for them to fall, but there is still ground there, and I think that should come when because if you think about October, that's when a lot of European shippers start thinking about their annual tender again, and thinking where that should go. So I think there we should see significant downward pressure, and I think again sort of carriers willing to go further and offer low rates to secure that capacity as they try and fill up the ships they have. That's to me what would make logical sense, but certainly much lower demand into the US. We will definitely be talking a lot about the alliances and how they've played it out, whether Gemini gets its 90% and how shippers are kind of experiencing that. I presume we'll still be talking about indexing because we're still looking at a volatile market, but certainly much lower spot rates and a different atmosphere in the market with carriers no longer having the upper hand would be my guess.
So it's going to be a really interesting end to the year, isn't it? A really interesting end to the year, because these shippers that have been maybe kicking the can down the road and not committing to those long-term contracts, if they're looking at the Xeneta data and if they see that relationship between the spot on the long and the spot kind of dropping considerably and the longs being a little bit more stable, and they say now's the time for us to really get the best deal we can or best agreement we can, then the end of the year there's going to be some interesting negotiations, isn't there?
Absolutely, and especially if I think, as we both we're not going back fully to the Red Sea this year. I think whether glass half full or empty, it's not happening this year, large scale. We can refer back to some previous podcasts where we've talked particularly about the Ocean Alliance, but 2026 maybe there. I'm willing to hope a little bit more that it will happen. And again, that's where you think, okay, if I'm going to sign a long-term contract for 12 months in December with the Red Sea closed, how do I build in that should the Red Sea reopen and should there be that further drop in freight rates, that's also built in. So we're still going to be talking about these more flexible agreements. But of it, a whole load also depends on what is happening in the US. Are tariffs in? Are they out? What level are they? All that kind of stuff also plays in, and we don't really have a way of knowing what that's going to look like in October, let alone into next year.
No, and any, you're bringing me to your glass half full approach now. There could be anything, couldn't there? There could be, I don't know, something happens in the kind of Taiwan area, or we don't know. Who knows? Nothing's off the table, is it, in terms of the geopolitical landscape at the moment? So again, going back to kind of end of 2023, everyone thought rates are set to drop. 2024 October, everyone thought rates are going to drop. But now we're saying rates are going to drop. Actually, if history is anything to go by, it won't. But
I'm going to hope that they will drop, that the atmosphere will be much easier for shippers to work in and to understand what's happening to their goods in the coming months, and that we won't need a mid-year update in 2026.
We're doing the mid-year update, whether you like it or not.
Whether there's a need for an update or not, but I guess in these days there's always need for an update.
I think we.
I should just be happy that it's mid-year rather than quarterly.
Don't give the people at Xeneta any ideas, Emily. Okay, well, that's a positive way to end the podcast. I think we covered a huge amount of ground. I say demand, supply, alliances, rates. If you want to have a better idea of how they're going to develop in the remainder of 2025, along with an update of year to date, then as I say, I would really encourage you to go onto the Xeneta website and download our mid-year outlook report, put together with the expertise of Emily and our chief analyst, Peter Sand, and we'll be publishing various blogs on the back of it as well. So keep going back to the Xeneta website. There's plenty of resources and information there for you. And of course, the next Freight Debate episode in a couple of weeks' time, when we don't even try and plan it now, do we, Emily? It's just what happens. But we hope listeners and viewers enjoy it. So until the next one, I think that's a wrap, Emily. So I think it is. So if you like it and you want to know what twists are around this corner, please hit subscribe and join us for the next episode of the Freight Debate. Thank you.